But stories that have been ongoing conversation. And this time you look at one of those, South Africa's gambling sector. It's posted record-breaking figures. The National Gambling Board saying that the industry recorded over 6 trillion US dollars turnover in the 2024-2025 financial year, underscoring the scale and complexity of one of the country's most lucrative and controversial industries. According to the board's annual report, the turnover represents the total amount wagered across casinos, betting platforms, lotteries, and online gambling. While turnover doesn't quite equal profit, it signals a major rise in gambling activity, particularly in the fast expanding online betting and iGaming sectors, which continue to outpace traditional casinos. We're joined now by the acting CEO of the National Gambling Board, Mr. Lungile Tukwana. Very good evening to you, Mr. Tukwana. Thank you so much for speaking to us. So, 1.5 trillion, I believe. Any CEO would be proud of that figure. But can you just tell South Africans exactly how much that money translates into not only real revenue, but how you came about this, which was the major contributing platform?
Right. Good evening, it's episode and the SABC viewers. Look, I think that gambling is one of the contributors, I think, to our economy, huge contributor. Now, obviously, it's driven by government policy, the operators that are in the space, and what we refer to as the PLA, which is the ones who are licensing mainly some of these operators that we actually have. So in a sense, what you're basically looking at there, you are looking at the rise in the gambling sector as it is suggested. And I think that the GGR, which is what we call the gross gambling rate, we're saying that we're sitting at the 75 billion. The majority of that is actually the money that is related to online betting, as we call it. You will remember that there are four modes that you basically have, one of them being the betting sector. Now, that has grown a lot, especially as it suggests the online one. And the causes for the growth of that one are mainly due to the issue of the ease of access of that, in the sense that you can access some of those on your cell phone, on your desktop, and the other easier ways of doing it. Now, the disadvantage of that for the casinos is that people may not necessarily just see the need to go to the casinos. They may want to play on their phone because it has no costs, but also you don't spend a lot of time driving there, so to speak. So it becomes easier to actually accept that. And I think that you would trace it back to the COVID times when the casinos actually went a little bit down, they went down big time because they were not allowed to actually go out at the time. Now, people obviously moved to the online betting, which is what saw the highest growth, as you would be able to see from our slides, so to speak. So that is why we are seeing those particular numbers. It's good, it's bad. It's good in the sense that it's a major contributor to the economy. I think that's number one. But on the other hand, you look at the other issues about the harm and the social effects of that and how it's being managed in general. So it is a progress on the other hand, but it gives us certain responsibility in terms of making sure that we deal with the socio-economic consequences.
And let's talk about the responsibility, because one does wonder how much of that money actually reaches the fiscus through taxes. Can you give us a sense of that?
If you look at the taxes that we actually got from that GGR, you will see that we got just over 5 billion of the money that goes to taxes and the other related stuff that is basically there. So one would argue that that is not a lot of money compared to the figure we're basically talking about, which points us to the need to make sure that we need to reform or to relook at the policy that deals with the aspects of online gambling and the other related stuff that may be there, because it is one. I think the levels of tax are not as high there at that particular level. So it's one of the areas that policymakers may need to actually look at to make sure that we strengthen, in a sense.
So the digital transformation strategy that is in place, or that is, in the offing, are you then saying that there are loopholes there, and does it also facilitate those particularly provincial gambling authorities who are sidestepping the strictures of the national framework, therefore perpetuating that fragmentation of the system? Is that where part of the blame lies?
I wouldn't necessarily blame any particular structure around that issue. Suffice to say that we all know that the National Gambling Act is an act that came in 2004. Now, when you look at 2004, now surely there has been a lot of developments. I think even in the online space, we would not have seen a lot of the online at that particular point, but now it has become the most prevalent way in which the people do their business, do their activities, and it becomes an issue that is there. Especially, we believe that some section of the section 11 of the Act may need to be revisited to make sure that it caters for the current realities that are there. I wouldn't think that the PLAs are violating necessarily the requirements that we actually have in terms of the Act. I think it's an indication of the fact that there's a need for us to revisit. But also, you'll bear in mind that the PLAs themselves have their own legislation that governs the gambling and their economic realities that they are facing in the various provinces. So there's need for harmonization of some of those and alignment in some of the aspects that we basically have. So we have all responsibilities when it comes to that, and we need to work together as the state entities.
But there is a recognition that there are, some major failures in the system. I mean, the Auditor General's qualified report did point to specific weaknesses in internal controls and grant management systems, and there were huge amounts of money that have been reported as either missing, and that's also beyond the underspending, which is supposed to go towards assisting in socio-economic hardships.
Well, I'm not sure which report you do be reporting, would you be referring to, because NGB for the 2024-25 got a clean audit. There was no underspending at the NGB, and that is what we're communicating to the portfolio committee, that we did quite well. We actually got a clean audit. So we don't have those challenges at the NGB. The main issues that we're dealing with at NGB are the issues around the gambling. So, in some of the areas that we are dealing with the gambling is an issue of the enforcement of the Act itself, the issue of the compliance around it. We don't do any grants at the NGB. So I think that you would not have got from the side of the NGB. Perhaps you would have confused the other report that was presented, because it was us and the NLC.
You are right, because I am referring actually to the NLC, but the point I was actually trying to point to, and I should have been clearer in that, is about the sector, that it does face that problem. I mean, there is alignment within the structure of the entities.
Well, it is always important that we become very prudent in the way we use the resources of the state, especially to advance those areas that are going to make sure that we enhance the services that are supposed to be delivered to the society in general, because they are the beneficiaries of the services that we actually render on our side. But I think that one of the reasons why gambling is also important is that because it contributes obviously to the fiscus, it also contributes to the creation of the employment that we see from time to time, and it may not be as major because, for example, we would be looking at the figures that we're actually producing of the jobs that are created in terms of gambling. So in a sense that we believe that there should be strengthening of the way we deliver our services, the way we regulate. I think especially we are a regulator, and the way that we make sure that from time to time there's contribution to the fiscal so that we can deliver better services.
And the self-regulation, do you think it is working to the good of South Africans in general? Because one would say that in as much as there is something for you to celebrate, there are still holes in the treatment services that remain severely underfunded.
Well, yeah, I think that on our side, I think as NGB, part of the issues we are looking at now, for example, includes how we really regulate the advertising aspect of gambling. Because that aspect, if it just works on its own, it's not regulated, or we're not enforcing the law that has been given, then we're going to fall short in terms of making sure that it is something that is properly handled. It is something that the unintended consequences are actually managed. So in a sense that it's important for us to work on the issue of the advertising to make sure that it doesn't affect the people that are vulnerable groups that may not have been intended to get such messages. But also the messages themselves should not be misleading because it may lead to people rushing to gamble. But we had intended for gambling to be actually a recreative activity rather than an activity that people are using as income generation. That is what we were looking at, and that is what we should still maintain. So we cannot just leave it. We need to regulate properly. We need to make sure that we implement the law, because the laws that we have must be implemented properly to make sure that we get the results that were intended when the MGA was put in place.
All right. Thank you so much for speaking to us, Mr. Tukwana. And I must say that perhaps we as South Africans need a fuller picture, especially on the technical